Hey there. I want to attempt to try to relate an experience and some of the learnings that resulted from the experience on my own personal ongoing journey with truth and reconciliation. Senator Murray Sinclair, I think had suggested that Indigenous people have done a lot of their truth and reconciliation work and that it's actually settlers who need to do their work. But anyways, I'm 47 now, and only within the last handful of years have I even really started to think of Canada in a way that inventories the experience of some of the first peoples here, and that's interesting in and of itself. So a few years ago, I was fortunate enough to be given an assignment by someone who, up until that point in time, I had never met in person. Grant Barkman from Decision Works out of Winnipeg contacted me online and had an event that they needed some graphic recording done at. And I didn't know that the event that I was going to in Saskatoon was really so focused on Indigenous communities. It was for the FSIN, Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations. So there's lots of leaders, lots of passionate community members and elders. And while I was there, because I like logos and I'm a graphic designer and I always like them, in fact, the whole hockey jersey thing is as much of a reflection of a love for logos and branding as it is for hockey. I oftentimes don't know much about the rosters or the collective bargaining agreements and blah, blah, blah for the players, but I do like the logos, and I feel like I could talk at length about the logos. Anyways, an elder came and put his arm around me after the end of day one, because I often do, put a lot of mustard into drawing logos, hand-drawn logos. I get a kick out of it. And so I had done these think tank logos and things like that, and this elder came and lovingly put his arm around me and kind of whispered in my ear and said, "You've done a really good job of drawing these logos. Tell me, why haven't you drawn our logos?" And I said, I don't know, but I will. And so I took that loving chastisement and I went back to the hotel room and I spent the lot of the remainder of that evening preparing for the next day, working on some pre-draw, which is elements that I prepare before the meeting. And so what I needed to do was inventory as many of the FSIN members who were at the event, and I talked with the facilitator and said, "Can you give me a list of who's here?" And I dove into the internet looking for their logos. And so what I found impacted me in a lot of ways. I found a lot of stories about communities in Saskatchewan that featured hard, sad symptoms of dysfunction and brutality. And that was hard to process in and of itself. Children killing children, neglected children, suicides, basically the kind of stuff that you wouldn't be surprised to find were you comparing disparities in social determinants of health, which is pretty plain. But I also felt hurt thinking, if I were an Indigenous counterpart of myself, and these the stories that Canadians were consuming about my efforts to attempt the difficult responsibilities to make of myself a responsible citizen, a halfway decent husband, an aspiring father, full of fears that I'm gonna repeat mistakes that I would rather not. I would be hurt and heartbroken, actually, that's what Canadians think of me. Seeing those stories was heartbreaking. And I spoke to an elder, whether she was an elder or not. To me, she was. She was a friend and someone who I talked with, and I said, you know, I told her, I said, if I was I would be heartbroken if that's all that people thought about my community. And she said, yeah, you know, we don't have any kids in care in our community, but that'll never make the news. And I got a new appreciation for the principle. If it bleeds, it leads. We know how fast, you know, negative information travels, and disparaging information like that. So even the big national CBC, I was like, can we write some, can we focus on that which is good? Anyways, the other thing that it stirred in me, now this is, I'm going to switch to the graphic designer in me. So I'm looking for logos so that I can see what they are and draw them. And what I find are just low-res JPEGs, like literally 125 pixels max. And I'm like, I'm pretty good at looking for vectors. If there's something online that's of a good resolution, usually I can find it. I couldn't find half of these things. So the way it felt to me in terms of thinking of the eradication by design, kill the Indian in the child, you know, cut that hair, take that name. Yeah, in terms of identity. So in that moment, in a language that I understood, which was graphic design, I could see how complete the erosion of culture, of identity, of story, song, language, dance, ceremony was. It was so bloody difficult to get a 125 pixel version of a logo that, if it ever existed in a high-res vector format, it certainly didn't now. Anyways, I know I'm... So, some of the takeaways from this experience for me are that I feel like it would be good to be a part of a process to help nations receive the kind of deliverable that the graphic design, marketing, visual communications, branding client would receive in terms of a brand book, how to use the book, so that when the colors show up on whatever, the side of a building, in print, on the side of vehicles, the side of a hockey arena, it looks the way that it should look. It looks good. Or embroidered on the back of a jacket or a hat. The idea would be to, in a systematic way, get together with those who are in authority to do so, elders in the community, get together with the youth, audit those colors that are the nation's colors, and then ensure that they're built properly as vectors with an email that council can send to whoever's using it. Whoever wants to use it, just forward them the stuff. People unpackage it, and the people who know how to use it will be happy to receive it, to receive everything. You want a transparent PNG file, an EPS file, an AI file, CDR file, whatever you want, it's in there. And then the colors look good. And of note for me, I feel like those stories, that identity, I feel like youth should be proud and want to wear those colors. I feel like kids at the mall should look at those colors and be like, man, that's badass. I'm like, yeah, it is badass. It's not Adidas, it's not Nike, it's not whatever. It's my nation, and represent it properly. So that's an idea. The other learning that stuck with me from that, and I've attempted to express this before, was on the second day I came back, and I basically had put this board up on the wall, and I can show you here. These are the logos, and a lot of these they were wrong, and they've been made more right, but a lot of them probably still are wrong for reasonable reasons. I am who I am, Mr. Urban, who's trying to like figure out the subtleties of these things. Anyways, I did my imperfect best, but I felt like my imperfect best was received with a spirit of gratitude and love, and for that I'm grateful, and it means a lot to me. In fact, I received a gift, and that was wonderful. But this blanket is something that was given to me, and it's special to me. It validates is that, white as I am, that my imperfect best is of utility for telling these visual stories. That means a lot to me. Anyways, what ended up happening is during the day, some event attendees, who I would assert up until now had been pretty quiet, well, they started to come look at the stuff and become less quiet. In fact, they were making corrections and telling me that's not right. This is the right way. You need to fix it. And so they would text me the correct logo, and in many cases they would actually tell me a story about why the one that I had got was incorrect. So now we're engaging, and now we're talking, and I felt like that was awesome, that's the purpose. In fact, I would argue be the measure of success of an event, is the degree to which you get engagement at an event. And so here as an event now, where I've got dozens of people coming up and correcting, and I had used a lot of Avery labels to cover up my mistakes, but that was another lesson, was that making mistakes allowed for a process to make things better, and I learned why in many cases the logos that I had found online were actually the incorrect ones. Anyways, that experience impacted me in a lot of ways on my own ongoing sort of inventorying of Canada's story, and I'll close with this. So I married a girl from Raymond, Alberta, and I've been attending the Canada Day Parade for a lot of years. And up until recently, maybe the half dozenth, I don't know, up until recently, it had never struck me as odd that on Canada Day, in that parade, there wouldn't be any Indigenous representation. We're next to the blood reserve, Kainai, like literally neighbors. And interestingly enough, of course, the brand of religion that I've found to be quite functional and blessed my life in significant ways is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, aka Mormon. So think of myself as a Christian. That community is pretty homogenous, Raymond, Alberta. It's like little Utah. But interestingly enough, in that parade, there was a Baptist float, and I was like, nice work, man. You got some moxie. Marching with the Mormons. The Baptist has got a float. And not only that, but there also was a gender diversity float as well. And again, I was like, that's impressive to me. That that's like wearing a Flames jersey in Edmonton or whatever. I know I'm making blanket statements, but my point is that those groups are in the parade, but your Indigenous brothers and sisters, not one song, not one dance, not one bead, not one feather, nothing is in the parade. And I was like, how can that be at this point in time in Canada's history, that we basically have the cultural apartheid in place? So I mean, that's how the thought occurred to me, and it still exists in my mind. So the notion that there isn't reconciliation work to do, I would say, no, I think that there is reconciliation work to do. About this work, 2020 featured a lot of Black Lives Matter. Closer to home in Canada, I think BIPOC and Indigenous lives matters of note as well, but difficult conversations. And I can appreciate a lot of people's frustration, you know, with the whole concept of intergenerational trauma. Some people just think, oh man, seriously, we gotta go round and round and round and round. I wasn't alive then. What does this have to do with me? You know, get a job, blah, blah, blah. Like, certainly. So that very, very polarized, not unlike borders in the US or citizenship or white and black and cancel culture. Everything is just at a fevered pitch in terms of polarization. And one thing that I have, naive perhaps, but I have a little bit of hope in, is the concept that it might actually have less to do with dumping buckets and buckets of money on polarized issues than it has to do with simply understanding and communicating so that people feel understood. Because I've been surprised on a number of occasions to see the effect of how that understanding, even in the most traumatic situations, results in a good feeling, a better feeling, a hopeful feeling, a catharsis. So in terms of willingness, you know, to do the work to understand and to demonstrate that understanding, I mean, for me, as I've actually gone on reserve and had some of that like public transit fight or flight feeling come to me, I feel like I'm 12 years old. I'm out riding my bike in the neighborhood by myself, and then there's a posse of bangers hanging out by the old, you know, the ice skating rink, and I'm kind of like, don't go over there, don't go over there, or like getting tuned at Marlboro LRT with a skateboard by gangsters or whatever. I'm saying, not to quote the RCMP from the G20, this isn't Canada anymore.
Oh.
Yeah. You haven't opened up your bag, so take off.
In Canada, that's something that's...
Yeah, this ain't Canada right now.
Oh!
This is in Canada right now?
No.
Wow.
No.
That's the feeling. Is this Canada anymore? And why is there such disparity? There's such disparity. Boil water advisory, youth suicides. Do a search for suicides in the Northwest Territories. It's not acceptable. Not only is it not acceptable, it's a national disgrace. Seriously, do a search for rate of suicides. And the notion that intergenerational trauma is something that happened long ago, it's not. I have, you know, along this journey of mine, had the opportunity to meet some courageous leaders, and sometimes it's difficult for events to happen as scheduled because of this unusually high reoccurring amount of funerals. That's traumatic. It's traumatic right now. Anyways, so what are you going to do about it? You know, I'm going to have to draw this because this is an idea. This is the political cartoon in my mind, and you know, based on my reading of the situation, it feels accurate to me. But it looks like a colonial East India Trading Company, shiny buttons, has come ashore and gone into the First Peoples antique art shop. Carvings, art, not unlike the Kitimat poll that ended up in Sweden, and then everyone in Sweden's like, oh, this is hard to know what we should do with this thing. Like, is it? It's, you're having a hard time figuring out what the right thing to do here is. Like, anyways, so when you look at some of the policies in connection with how communities were dealt with the treaties, with the Indian Act, with the pass system, with the Indian agent, with residential schools, with Indian hospitals, you think that sort of like cultural genocide by design goes away magically? I feel like it's like the colonial queen has brought her snot-nosed little RCMP jackboot thug into the antique shop and has trashed the place, broken everything, and then is basically leaving the shop like, nah, you fix it. And I'm saying, my feeling is, you broke it, you bought it. Those are my thoughts, for good or ill.